the 1909 Baker Electric, the 81 DeLorean DMC-12.
Jay Leno, the man who always seemed strong and untouchable, has finally spoken after years of silence. Fans waited, wondered, and worried, and now the truth is out. For someone who rarely shows weakness, this sudden honesty is shocking. Could it be about the claims surrounding his wealth? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this confession. The silence that shook late night. Jay Leno has always carried the image of a man who moves through life with steady steps, calm hands, and a mind that never loses focus. From his early years, people noticed something special about him. As a child, he had a natural curiosity that made him ask endless questions about the world. He loved making people laugh, even before he understood what comedy truly was. This spark grew into something bigger as he got older. By the time he started chasing comedy as a real dream, he already knew how hard he was willing to work to make it happen. Those early comedy days were not easy, but Jay treated every moment like a chance to grow. He stepped on small stages, faced difficult crowds, and kept pushing forward. He knew what he wanted, a life where he could make people smile, forget their problems, and enjoy a moment of lightness. His drive was powerful. He believed in showing up, no matter what. This became the root of his famous work ethic, the belief that the show must go on. Jay never missed a performance. He never took the easy way out. He carried the spirit of someone who understood that consistency builds greatness. As the years passed, this determination shaped him into a household name. When he stepped into late-night television, everything changed. He brought warmth, humor, and a simple charm that made viewers feel safe. People trusted him. They saw him as someone who would always show up at the same time with the same smile, ready to make their day lighter. Night after night, year after year, Jay stood strong. He became known as the man who never complained, never broke down, and never let the world see any moment of weakness. This strength was not loud. It was calm, steady, and almost comforting. Everyone felt it. And because of that, his silence became something powerful long before he ever stopped talking. People knew that Jay did not reveal too much about his feelings. He kept his emotions tucked away, sharing only what he believed was necessary. During interviews, he skillfully avoided anything that touched on emotional subjects. If someone tried to dig too deep, he gently redirected the conversation. It was not coldness, it was simply who he was. His persona had become a shield built over many years, strong, steady, resilient. This image worked well for him. Viewers believed he could handle anything. They admired him for his strength and trusted that nothing could shake him. He was the sort of person who could walk through storms and still show up smiling the next day. But this same image also created an unexpected tension. It made him seem almost unbreakable, almost untouched by the struggles of ordinary life. And that is why, when his silence finally came, it felt heavier than anyone expected. For so long, Jay had been the steady voice of late night, the man who always found the right joke, the right tone, the right way to keep people entertained. But when he suddenly stopped speaking on certain matters, fans began to worry. They had always believed that if Jay had something to say, he would say it. If he laughed, everything was fine. If he talked, life kept moving smoothly. Silence from him felt wrong. It felt like something serious was happening behind the scenes. Public figures usually run to clear rumors. They make statements, post online, speak through representatives, or find subtle ways to keep people calm. Jay did none of that. His quiet created a space that felt too wide, too still. Fans imagined all sorts of possibilities. If someone as steady as Jay was not talking, then it must mean something deeper. His silence, shaped by years of emotional restraint, suddenly felt louder than words. People read it like a warning. They wondered what he was going through. They wondered if the man who never showed weakness was finally facing something he could not hide. That is the strange power of a legend built on strength. When everything looks firm for so long, any small break creates shock. Jay Leno had spent his entire life building an image of reliability, humor, and toughness. He never needed to explain himself. His work spoke for him. His laughter carried him. His presence reassured people. So when the silence arrived, It carried the weight of all those years. Each moment of quiet made his fans lean in closer, trying to understand what he could not say. Despite his reputation for being silent, years of mounting pressure finally forced him to speak. A garage full of questions. Jay Leno has always been known for laughter, hard work, and a love for engines that roar louder than any audience he ever entertained. His garage, filled with rare machines and shining steel, has long been a symbol of his success. But behind the polished chrome and perfect paint lies a quieter side of his world, one where history, ownership, danger, and public opinion blend into something far more complicated. One of the most discussed moments in this hidden story goes back to a legal fight involving a classic car from the early 1930s. It was a Duesenberg Model J, a legendary name among collectors. The issue did not start with Jay. It began when the heirs of a previous owner said that the car had been taken from a storage garage in Manhattan and sold without proper approval. They claimed the sale happened because of unpaid parking fees and that the auction gave the garage a reason to let the car go. When Jay eventually bought that beautiful machine, he found himself placed right in the center of a storm he did not create. The heirs argued that the sale felt unfair and possibly arranged just to settle small old bills. People began asking tough questions about how rare cars are handled when ownership is unclear. Some wondered who truly has the right to such historic machines when families, estates, and collectors all have different stories to tell. This legal issue did not paint Jay as a villain. It did not accuse him of theft or wrongdoing. But it did bring attention to the world he lives in. A world where the past is often locked inside metal, and where every car may carry a history more complex than the engine under its hood. Still, the story did not end there. Jay's garage has also been a place of real danger. In November of 2022, he was working on a vintage steam car when a sudden burst of flame left him with serious burns on his face and hands. It was a frightening reminder that old machines, no matter how beautiful, can become unpredictable in a second. Not long after that, in early 2023, he was riding another vintage machine, a motorcycle from his collection, when an accident left him with broken bones. Again, people were afraid. They worried about how much risk one man could face when he works on his machines, pushes them, rides them, and treats them as living memories instead of fragile objects from another time. None of these moments were scandals. They were not caused by bad intentions or careless ego, but they did raise real questions. How safe is a private collection when the owner works with so many old engines? Should there be stricter rules for vintage machines? Should someone with such a huge collection allow more experts, more protection, or even more public access? That last question opened an even bigger debate in the collector world. Some people admire Jay for preserving so many rare cars. They say he keeps history alive. But others believe that machines with such long stories should be in museums, not hidden behind private doors. They argue that history belongs to everyone, not just to the ones who can afford it. Jay also faced small waves of criticism because of events in his career, especially the time slot conflict in 2010. Even though that issue had nothing to do with his cars, it changed the way some people viewed him. A few saw him as someone who always came out on top, even if others were unhappy. That feeling of suspicion made some people look at his wealth, his fame, and his huge garage with doubtful eyes. And of course, as with any public figure, rumors appeared. Wild stories, strange accusations, tales of supposed secret dealings, none of them ever backed up by real evidence. These stories floated around simply because large collections, big wealth, and old mysteries tend to attract whispers. Through it all, Jay remained silent. No dramatic statements, no long explanations, no emotional interviews. His quiet response made the world even more curious. People felt that if he was not speaking, then something serious must be happening. In a world where famous people rush to defend themselves with loud words, Jay chose stillness. And that stillness had power. It made the public wonder what was truly happening inside that enormous garage filled with old engines and long shadows. But how did Jay Leno react to these claims? Keep on watching to find out more. The moment he finally spoke. After years of noise surrounding his garage, Court papers, accidents, rumors, fear, and endless questions, Jay Leno finally decided to speak. And when he did, the world listened. Not because his words were dramatic, but because they were rare. He talked about the Duesenberg lawsuit first. He explained that he bought the car through what he believed was a clean and legal sale, and that he never intended to take something that belonged to someone else. He said he respected the history of every machine he owned and would never want to be part of anything that harmed a family or erased a legacy. His calm explanation softened the anger that had built up in the shadows of that old dispute. Then he addressed the accidents. He spoke about how working with vintage cars is not the same as working with new machines. Old engines are complex, sensitive, and full of surprises. They demand respect. They can turn dangerous very quickly. He admitted that the risks are real, but he also spoke about the passion that drives him. The feeling of bringing an old engine back to life, the joy of understanding machinery that many people have forgotten. He explained that he never tried to hide what happened. He simply did not want to turn his injuries into entertainment. His silence was not stubbornness. It was humility. Next, he spoke about the public criticism that came from old career conflicts. He did not blame anyone. He did not defend his past choices with anger. Instead, he showed that he understood how fame can twist stories and how misunderstandings can grow into storms. His voice was steady, slow, and honest in a way that surprised many who had spent years guessing what he truly felt. And finally, he touched on the biggest debate of all, the question of whether private collectors should control so many rare and historic vehicles. He said he believed collectors and museums both have roles to play in keeping history alive. Museums protect cars for the public. Collectors protect them out of deep personal love. In his eyes, both paths can serve the past, as long as the machines are respected and cared for. His message was simple, but that simplicity carried weight. It showed that behind the engines and the jokes and the bright stage lights was a man who understood responsibility, risk, and the deep meaning of the objects he loved. When Jay Leno finally spoke, he broke years of silence in a way that calmed fears rather than feeding them. He did not try to shine. He did not try to impress. He simply explained his world with patience and sincerity. And that moment revealed something important. Even legends, even icons, even men surrounded by steel and fame sometimes need to step forward and let the world see their quiet truth. However, this wasn't the only storm silently building up in Jay Leno's world. The slow-building storm. Signs that something was wrong. Even the brightest stars can face shadows that fans rarely see. Jay Leno, a name synonymous with late-night television and relentless energy, had always presented himself as strong, reliable, and almost tireless. He moved through life with a sense of steady confidence that few could match. Yet, beneath the surface, a slow-building storm was quietly forming, one that only the most attentive observers could sense. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, with small signs that something was not quite right. The first hints appeared in public. Fans attending events or simply catching glimpses of him on television began to notice slight differences. His posture seemed more rigid, movements less fluid. The lively spark in his eyes that had once defined him appeared momentarily dimmed. Weight fluctuations, sometimes noticeable over months, created a sense that he was not as carefree as he once seemed. These changes were small, almost trivial on their own, but for those who had watched his rise from a curious child with a love for comedy to one of the most recognizable television hosts in history, the differences were undeniable. It was as though the man who had always carried himself with a sense of invincibility was showing tiny cracks in his armor. Alongside these public appearances, Leno began stepping back from projects that had once defined his daily life. Scheduled appearances on talk shows were reduced or shifted to pre-recorded segments. Charity events and speaking engagements he had always supported were occasionally canceled or delegated to others. Some of his longtime collaborators noted that he suddenly seemed less eager to commit to projects, even ones he had once championed with enthusiasm. These were not grand gestures or dramatic exits, but quiet withdrawals that prompted speculation. Observers wondered if he was protecting something, perhaps himself, perhaps those closest to him. The pause in his usual relentless activity only amplified the sense that something hidden was unfolding. Online, the whispers grew louder. Social media and discussion forums buzzed with theories, speculation, and concern. Fans shared fleeting moments they had captured on camera, noticing small hesitations in his speech or a slower pace in his steps. Headlines began to speculate, sometimes wildly, about his personal life, his health, and even the pressures of maintaining his public persona. Rumors multiplied as fast as they could be read, each one more alarming than the last. Week after week, these conversations continued, painting a picture of unease around a man who had long been considered unshakable. Yet even amid these subtle warnings, there was a kind of quiet dignity in his approach. He did not respond to every question or clarify each rumor. Instead, he moved carefully, choosing when and how to appear in public, offering only glimpses into his life while guarding the deeper struggles. This deliberate silence added to the mystery. Fans could sense that something was happening, yet they could not fully understand it. It was a slow, suspenseful tension, almost cinematic in its unfolding. The storm was not explosive. It did not announce itself with headlines screaming "crisis." Instead, it crept quietly, leaving small but unmistakable signs. Every canceled appearance, every pause before answering a question, every subtle change in expression contributed to a growing unease. Those closest to him, who had once shared in his daily routines and his love of comedy, noticed it first. Then the world began to catch up, piecing together fragments of a story that was not yet ready to be fully told. Through all this, one thing remained clear. Leno's strength was still present, even if muted. He moved carefully, maintained his work ethic where he could, and continued to be visible, albeit selectively. The slow-building storm did not stop him entirely. It merely shifted the rhythm of his life. What had once been a straightforward, tireless march forward became a careful navigation of challenges, both visible and hidden. In hindsight, these signs now form a coherent pattern, a sequence of subtle warnings that something significant was unfolding. The public, accustomed to seeing Leno as unwavering, could sense the tension even when details remained elusive. The slow-building storm had arrived, marked not by dramatic incidents but by small, persistent signs that a man who had always seemed in control was quietly facing his struggles. And yet, as with all storms, the question remained: when would it break fully into the open? How would the world respond when the truth finally emerged? For now, the signs were enough to keep fans watching, worried, and hopeful. The slow-building storm reminded everyone that even the strongest figures can face moments of uncertainty, and that sometimes the most powerful stories unfold quietly, long before the world realizes they exist. But what happens when the garage that once brought peace suddenly feels like a battlefield? The sanctuary that turned against him. Jay Leno has always loved machines in a way that felt almost childlike. His garage was never just a building filled with cars. It was his mirror, his playground, and the one place where he felt completely free. Every car seemed to say something about him: his curiosity, his humor, his love for history, and his endless desire to understand how things work. People who knew him well often said that he did not collect cars just to own them. He collected stories, memories, and small pieces of the past that deserved to be kept alive. Inside his massive garage were rows of rare machines from almost every era of motoring. More than 180 cars sat beside more than 160 motorcycles, each restored with patience and care. There were steam cars that whispered about forgotten technology, electric cars from the early 1900s, motorcycles with unusual engines, and even tanks that carried a strange mix of power and history. His beloved McLaren from the early 1990s, bought for less than $1 million back then, had grown into a treasure worth many times more. To Jay, each of these vehicles held a soul. He knew their stories the way some people memorize old songs. He had cars once owned by Howard Hughes, a rare Duesenberg that only a handful of people had ever seen in person, and the few remaining turbine cars that sounded like small aircraft. Even the Baker electric car, his wife Mavis's favorite, had a place of honor among the roaring engines. This was why his garage was more than a collection. It was a sanctuary. It was where he worked late into the night, covered in grease, laughing at his jokes, humming to himself as he tightened a bolt or polished a fender. It was the place where he felt most like himself. Not a celebrity, not a late-night legend, but simply a man who loved machines and the quiet peace of fixing them. For decades, the garage had been his safest space. During charity events like the Love Ride, where he served as Grand Marshal since the mid-1980s, people saw his passion shine. His garage also became a home for his show, where he talked about restoration, unique car models, and wild inventions like jet-powered motorcycles and solar hybrids. It even helped video game creators bring old Los Angeles to life, offering them almost 100 cars from the 1940s as references. But everything changed after the accident. The moment he stepped back into the garage, something felt different. The familiar smell of oil and metal, once comforting, now carried a quiet warning. The walls that once felt warm suddenly seemed colder. The machines that always welcomed him now reminded him of how quickly life can shift. For the first time in his life, Jay felt uneasy in the place he trusted most. He walked around slowly, touching the cars the way you might touch something fragile. He noticed how the light hit the floor, how the silence felt heavier than usual. Even picking up a tool felt strange, as if the garage had been turned upside down. The emotional tension ran deep. His sanctuary had become a place that reminded him of his vulnerability. He still loved the machines, but now each spark, each hiss of steam, each turn of a wrench reminded him of how quickly things can go wrong. He understood risk better than ever, and it settled in his heart in a way he could not easily shake off. His friends saw the shift before he even spoke about it. They noticed that he was quieter, not because he wanted to hide anything, but because he was trying to make sense of how he felt. The man who once filled every room with energy now paused before starting conversations. The jokes he usually fired off without thinking sometimes stayed stuck on his tongue. He listened more and laughed less, as if something inside him was still healing. Some friends made gentle comments. They could tell that the accident had carved a small shadow in a man who rarely showed fear. Jay brushed their words aside, but not in his usual playful way. It was softer, a little distant, as if he was trying to protect both himself and the people who cared about him. Even while writing his columns for Popular Mechanics or reviewing powerful sports cars for newspapers, he seemed a touch more careful, a bit more reflective. His love for machines remained strong, but the accident had added a quiet layer of caution to everything he did. His garage, once the brightest part of his world, had turned into a place he had to learn to trust again. It was still filled with history, passion, and beauty. But now it also held a reminder. Even the strongest, most skilled people can face moments that shake them deeply. And for the first time, Jay Leno, the man who always kept going, had to face that truth inside the very sanctuary he once believed would never fail him. Why did Jay Leno remain silent for years, even as the storm around him kept growing? Jay Leno's silent struggle. For someone who had always seemed larger than life, the day of the accident felt like time had stopped. Jay Leno, a man known for his boundless energy, quick wit, and unshakable presence, was suddenly faced with a moment that shook him to his core. It was a day like any other, filled with routines he had perfected over decades, but in a heartbeat, everything changed. The place he had always felt most comfortable, surrounded by machines, engines, and the hum of his beloved garage, became a reminder of how fragile life truly is. That day marked a turning point, a quiet shift that few outside his closest circle could fully understand. Immediately, the world around him reacted. His team, trained to respond to every challenge, moved swiftly. They ensured he received the care and support he needed while shielding him from unnecessary stress. Fans who would normally see his cheerful face on television or at events were instead met with silence as news of the incident slowly began to spread. The entertainment world, accustomed to his constant presence and tireless work ethic, felt a ripple of shock. People wondered what had happened and how someone so strong and seemingly invincible could be caught off guard by a single moment. Despite the worry and curiosity swirling around him, Leno chose silence. He did not rush to explain, defend, or apologize. Pride played a role. He had built a life and career on consistency and reliability, and appearing vulnerable was not part of his persona. Fear also influenced his choice. He did not want to alarm fans or make his struggles seem insurmountable. Being in the public eye meant that every word, every gesture was magnified. Maintaining a strong image was not just a career choice, it was a shield he had relied on for decades. By staying quiet, he attempted to protect both himself and those who admired him. The months that followed were filled with subtle shifts. Jay moved with caution, approached projects more carefully, and sometimes hesitated before committing to events he had previously embraced without question. Fans and colleagues noticed small changes. The sparkle in his performances seemed slightly dimmed, his humor occasionally tempered, and his energy more measured. Yet outwardly he continued to work, host, and entertain, maintaining the illusion of invincibility while navigating a personal storm few could see. Rumors began to multiply. Internet forums buzzed with speculation, and headlines suggested all sorts of explanations. Unverified claims about his personal life, his finances, and even his car collection spread quickly. Some stories were wild, hinting at connections or issues that had no basis in fact. Still, the volume of chatter added pressure. Leno could not remain hidden forever, and the longer he stayed silent, the more intense the curiosity became. Fans wanted answers, colleagues sought clarity, and the public's need for reassurance grew louder each day. Finally, the moment arrived when silence was no longer an option. He spoke out, not with fanfare or drama, but with a quiet honesty that reflected the weight he had carried alone. The message was simple, yet powerful. He acknowledged the accident, the challenges it brought, and the reality of managing such an incident in the public eye. The act of speaking was more than explanation. It was relief, a release of the tension he had held onto for so long. The response was immediate. Audiences were surprised, not because the incident was unknown, but because of the courage it took to address it openly. Media outlets dissected every word, while fans flooded social media with support, gratitude, and relief. People felt a connection to the human side of Jay Leno, a side that had always been shielded by his humor and energy. His honesty sparked conversation about resilience, vulnerability, and the hidden pressures faced by public figures. The reality he revealed was sobering. The accident had affected him emotionally, mentally, and professionally. He carried the stress quietly, managing responsibilities while grappling with the lingering effects of the incident. The burden of decades in the spotlight, the relentless schedules, high expectations, and pressure to always be on, compounded the difficulty of coping privately. For a man who had been viewed as virtually unbreakable, the challenge was not simply recovery, but navigating life while preserving the image that fans had come to trust. A significant part of his hesitation to speak out came from his love and respect for his audience. He did not want to worry them, nor did he seek pity. He was aware that millions of people relied on the familiar rhythm of his work, the jokes, and the comfort of his presence. Yet at the same time, he recognized that remaining silent was a form of dishonesty. By finally addressing the situation, he balanced his need for privacy with the responsibility of truthfulness, revealing both strength and humanity in a single act. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.